Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we have a great one tonight. We have a Canada show, a truce with Canada. So we have Jordan Bonaparte is filling in for Alejandro Rojas, who actually became ill today, and he wrote me just a few minutes ago saying he can't make the show. So I have Jordan Bonaparte from Canada. Our guest also, MJ Baniyas, is also from Canada. So we'll call this the Canadian Truce Show. And I want to thank everyone that supports the show. We are over on KGRA radio, and we are also on YouTube, and we are live on our website, which is podcastufo.com. And anyone wants to go check that out, there are some blogs over there. We're looking for a blog writer, if anyone's interested in doing that. And so check out podcastufo.com. Also, there's a mailing list there, so you can see what our upcoming guest is. We do not abuse the mailing list. We only send out once a week with the upcoming guests and also the times that the show is live. And speaking of that, next week, my guest should be, if his car doesn't break down, is Chris O'Brien. He's going to be heading out. It's going to stay at my guest house. We're going to do a in-studio show here next week. So that should be fun. Chris is a lot of fun. And our guest tonight is MJ Baniyas, and we're going to talk a little bit more about him when we get ready. For now, we're going to bring in, first of all, I do want to say I want to thank everyone that supports the show. Anyone can do that, and that information is on podcastufo.com. And Jordan, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for filling in.
Well, when duty calls, Martin, I'm here for you, buddy.
I know, this is like
the Canadian,
last minute.
You call it a Canadian truce, but it's me and MJ against you, so this is more like a takeover.
Oh, no.
I couldn't turn that opportunity down.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about tariffs when MJ gets on. But anyway, thanks so much for filling in. And I know this is last minute. Did you get a chance to check out any UFO news to bring us today?
Yeah, well, really, what I see discussed online in terms of UFO news for the last few days, maybe this isn't a UFO story and it's a little political, but there's been a lot of talk among UFO circles about Trump's recent announcement to form the Space Force. Right. I've seen, of course, conspiracy theories that his attention to the Space Force may have undercurrents within the UFO culture, but I don't know. I would love to sit down and talk to him about his thoughts on this, but there's something going on up there that has him concerned, it seems.
Well, yes, I saw when he was doing this a little bit about it that it's he wants it as a part of the armed forces, actually, which is pretty interesting. And I know that nothing can be done without congressional approval, but it still is interesting that he actually has interest in space. So, a little while ago there was an announcement that we can go back to the moon, which I think is awesome. I think that would be great to get back there and see what's happened in the so many years ago. I think it was 1972 or 73 is the last time we were on the moon. So
yeah, his announcement was to make it the 6th division of the Department of National Defense. I think I love the idea of money and attention and science being directed towards the sky, but I think I would rather it be spent in a different way than defense and military. I wish it was more just towards exploration, but I don't know what his plans are or what his concerns are regarding our safety in the sky. But I guess any money spent towards that, well, I shouldn't say that. I would like to say any money spent towards that means is a good thing for those of us who are interested in this. But that said, there's probably some nasty things you could do by building a space force or arming a space force.
Well, I know there's like the Moon Treaty or something like that. I know I looked into it quite a while ago, so I'm not really up on it. But I know that the moon is not supposed to be used in any way for any type of military or any other for anything other than exploration. I think there's some type of treaty that we signed, and I know it's against the Star Wars thing that came up when Reagan was in, against all that. I mean, if we start like arming ourselves in space, I think that's who knows what that'll lead to. So I think being prepared is good, but arming in space, I don't know exactly if that's such a good idea. It's only going to breed more possible conflict, in my opinion.
Yeah, I just felt like in our past there was a bit of course, there was the whole Space Wars program, but there was a lot of competition among the different world's powers to go into space more so as in an exploratory fashion. You know, the race to the moon and these sorts of things. I love that idea, but the arms race in the sky is a bit darker of something to think about, and it's maybe something that's better off left in science fiction works. But that said, you know, safety is important, being prepared for something in the future. You know, there's a lot of different satellites and things going on up there that I'm sure there's a national security concern, you know, behind all this. But I'd be curious to hear a more casual explanation of what the plans are, and maybe that's something that'll come out in the future. But I prefer to think that Donald Trump caught wind of an oncoming UFO invasion, or maybe he saw some upcoming Tom DeLonge video that Tom hasn't released to us yet, and you know, and this got Trump's back up against the wall. So We'll see. I mean, maybe it'll be an exciting month.
Yeah. Well, I know that's your sense of humor. A lot of people are going to take you serious on that. But I think you know, I mean, there probably should be protocols. You know, so far, nothing has really, as far as we know, has attacked us in any type of way, at least in the last, you know, million years. But anyway, you know, I don't think it's a bad idea to have some preparation to address something in case, you know, we did have hostile incoming. It would be not a bad idea to have something lined up. Just, I don't know if we could possibly even protect ourselves. You know, if they could get here, who knows what they could do. You know.
Yeah, exactly. It's to prepare for a threat as vague as, you know, extraterrestrial invasion. It would be a little tricky. That I have a hard time believing that that's what his concern is, or the government's concern is with, you know, with the Space Force. But you know, a lot of people, if you run in some of the same circles online that I do, and you read kind of some of the thoughts people have about extraterrestrial life and its interaction with our world, you know, there's probably a lot of people who think that we should be prepared and should be arming to defend ourselves when the time inevitably comes. But I guess I just haven't seen evidence of that yet.
Right. Do you have anything else that you were able to look at before the show?
You know, there wasn't. Yeah, as I browsed through the news, and really I haven't seen a lot. Here in Canada, what I'm thinking about is the upcoming Shag Harbor UFO Festival. The 51st anniversary is coming up. We had a great time there together last year, Martin. I don't imagine you plan to go through that again.
Well, I'll tell you one thing I would never, ever do, and that's I would never, ever, ever drive again from Maine. You know,
yeah, I don't blame you. Yeah. That's a long drive, and you had your little dog in the car, so yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember. It seemed like it was 1,600 miles, or maybe it wasn't that long, but it sure felt like it. No, it's not going to happen. But you're going to that, I assume, because it's not too far away from you, right?
No, just a couple hours. I'll definitely be there, and they got a great lineup this year. Chris Rutkowski, who's a friend of your upcoming guest MJ's, is going to be speaking there, and really looking forward to that because he's, in my opinion, Canada's top researcher of the UFO phenomenon. He publishes the Canadian UFO Survey each year, where he compiles the statistics of the year's reports. So I'm really excited to see him speak. Chris Stiles, who is kind of the man behind the Shag Harbor UFO incident, will be there again this year. So it's going to be a great time. But an idea that I had for you, Martin, you often talk about having people staying in your guest house, and you talk about it a lot. I know you have a beautiful property there. You should plan a little festival right in your property. You have your guest house. You could probably have 30, 50 people up there stargazing.
Well, I actually do have, like, the place. Part of the place was used for conferences, and there's a big ballroom. The only problem is the ceiling fell in, so that's a little bit of a problem.
Yeah,
but
that
anyway,
is
it is
problem.
fixed, but still. it still needs a lot of work. But yeah, it's something I thought of briefly, but I'm not sure if I'll ever do something like that. But good thoughts anyway.
You could even have a journalist version where you have different journalists live streaming, and you could have it almost like a web conference where people, your listeners from around the world, could attend via the internet, and you could have podcasters, journalists.
Wow.
You could have Alejandro there.
Yeah. Well, you're the thinker, that's for sure. So I really appreciate you coming on. I know it was such short notice, and I really do appreciate you coming on. And when is that up in Canada? It's another 2 months, right?
Yeah, I think it's the first week of August, I believe. I wish I knew the date off the top of my head, but it's yeah. It's I think they're having it at the beginning of August. It's all online. If you just Google Shag Harbor UFO Festival, you'll find the schedule and whatnot. So it's all there.
All right, excellent. Okay, Jordan. Well, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. Especially
Anytime,
the last
Martin.
minute. I mean, just a couple of minutes ago, it seems like I called you. So anyway, thanks.
Yeah.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
My pleasure.
All right. You take care.
Have a great time with MJ. He's awesome.
All right. Thank you. All right. So our guest, MJ Baniyas, he is a writer, a blogger, and who critically, philosophically examines the weird, the strange, and the anomalous. And he's got a book he's putting together. We're going to be talking about that coming right up. So how you doing? How are you doing, MJ?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
Thank you. And thanks so much for joining us.
No, it's my pleasure. I gotta be honest. This is one of my favorite UFO podcasts, and I was really surprised when you took the leap and joined KGRA. Well done, Mazel Tov.
Well, thank you. Yes, one of the things I've always wanted to do. It's been important. Is to try to get as much of an audience as I can out there,
Yep.
And so I had thought about it for quite a while, and I can't believe I'm actually simulcasting. I didn't know that could be done, but on YouTube, it's a great thing. It's not really that much more work,
No.
so it's all good. So for the person, let's see, I think you were on about 10 months ago last time you were on, and so this is your second visit. But for the person that is not aware of who you are, would you mind filling everyone in?
Sure. Yeah, I'm just a humble UFO writer, blogger, journalist. I write for Mysterious Universe. I have my own blog at terraobscura.net. And my interest in UFOs has been is very old, and I've loved it since I was a kid rather. But right now, the big project for me has been my first book. So that's sort of been where I've been hiding for, I think, the last year or so.
Oh, and can you tell us? You did tell me a little bit about it, but go ahead and tell the listener, if you would, what that's about.
Sure. My book is really about the UFO subculture, the UFO community. That's really what my interest is. UFOs are fascinating, but for me, I think the people who make up the community that sort of engages with the UFO phenomenon, that for me is really sort of the more fascinating thing. So my book is basically exploring different aspects of the subculture. I have sort of various interviews and individuals who have spoken to me and told me their stories, and basically I'm sort of taking on the sort of trying to develop a bit of a framework for how the UFO subculture functions and how it looks and what it is, basically. Hopefully sort of original and the first of its kind.
Well, I think, there's been a lot of discussion about, say, for instance, pop culture and UFOs. And so I'm sure it kind of follows along that. But and people have talked about, kind of almost like a religious aspect to it and almost a cult following. And I do think you do actually see that in certain circumstances, that there's, like a cult following. And I'm not pointing any fingers or anything. It's just it does seem like there is part of that going on out there.
No, I agree. I think the subcultures, it's incredibly complex, and there's a lot of nuance. And I think really when we try to define, who's a member of the subculture or who's a member of the community, it's very difficult to draw those lines and distinctions, especially since there's really no ivory tower, or there's no sort of established university, or there's no sort of established, I guess, paradigm that sort of says this is what the UFO subculture is, and it's sort of it's encapsulated and that's it. That doesn't exist. A colleague of mine, Ryan Sprague, who's a UFO podcaster and author, he sort of said, if you ever, if you want to become a ufologist, what do you say? Spin around 3 times and touch your nose, and you are one, right? So it's one of those. It's one of those things where we're sort of trapped in this weird world where we can't really draw a distinction or a line as to who's a member and who isn't, and this is sort of what this book tries to address.
I seem to get a lot of people that contact me that want to be on the show that I would consider really far out on the fringe, and and I've had a few people on that are kind of out there, and I kind of let the listening audience take it up, but I've noticed an upsurge in people contacting me, trying to get on the show, that claim that they've been living among aliens or on another planet, or they are star children, or things like that. It just seems like it seems to be growing. Are you noticing any trends for what's been happening, or any upsurge or anything?
I think that this has sort of always existed. I think what's become obviously more prevalent is just the rise of the internet has allowed anyone to sort of tell a story, and really parsing through all of those individuals and trying to figure out, where do we draw the line of truth, and where do we draw the line of just total nonsense, is again really difficult. And a lot of it, like you mentioned before, it sort of comes down to sort of a more religious or theological sense. A lot of it boils down to belief. Do you, as a podcaster and a host, believe in their story? Because fundamentally, they won't have any evidence really to present to you that suggests they are star children, or they've been living with aliens on Mars, or with the reptilians, or on the other side of the moon. Ultimately, they're not going to be able to provide this apart from an anecdote. And this is sort of good and bad, right? And this is maybe the beauty of the UFO subculture, in that it's sort of total anarchy. It's a total chaotic mess and a total chaotic system, where you can't really delineate, I guess, sort of truth from fiction all the time. I think common sense often will apply, and will make judgment calls based upon common sense. But man, you can't. They can't prove it, and you can't disprove it, and it's sort of strange and weird and beautiful all at the same time, I think.
Yeah, I know you mentioned Ryan earlier, and I know his book was kind of along the line of this. Basically exploring the psychology of the whole phenomena, and I always have to keep myself in check, when I think about this whole topic as well, and I try not to go out too far on the limb, but I also try to be open-minded. But I have not followed anyone, and that's the part where I think when there's a difference between a fan and someone following someone. I believe, and I have seen there are people that kind of have risen to the top of this field in certain ways, and some of them being a little bit fringe, and they have people defending them, which is very cult-like in a way.
Indeed. I mean, I have to be honest, as a podcaster, and again, I've had this conversation with Ryan on his show, but as a podcaster, as someone who has to, generate an audience, often we have to be careful sort of what we say, right? Because ultimately, if you alienate someone who has a big following, even though, we could probably debate, whether they're committing fraud or not, you take a big risk. And I have to be honest, I mean, you're going to have a whole assortment of audience members today, I'm sure, that I will probably say something and I will make someone upset because I said that their favorite UFO expert or guru or channeler or who knows is full of it. I don't want to, but sometimes it comes out.
Yes.
you can't run that risk, right? Because ultimately the subculture dictates whether people listen to you or not, and like you said, they have these cult-like followings, and they can muster a lot of people to come after you and put you down and create fake Facebook accounts and troll you and all that stuff.
Yeah, which is quite amazing. Yes, anyone that follows my YouTube channel will see that there's, I have a few trolls after me, have been, and I just don't let it bother me. I just have them, as long as they're not saying anything racial or like slandering any of my guests. I usually don't even bother to look at too many of the comments. Unfortunately, I just feel like it's not a place I really want to go.
No, and do not engage, right? Just don't engage. Yeah.
Right. So, but anyway, everyone is welcome to their opinion, but sometimes it makes me wonder why someone gets so upset over something minor when they do.
Well, I think that's kind of that's one thing the UFO subculture lends itself very well to is opinion and speculation, and that's fine. I think speculation is great. I think it's awesome that we can sit here and have literally philosophical conversations about the nature of the universe or the nature of anomalous phenomena or sort of esoteric concepts. I think that's great. I think when we start making truth claims, though, and when we start saying, the UFO phenomenon is X or this event over here is Y, without any evidence or without any concrete data to back it up, I think we run into problems. And I think that this is where we sort of see this shift in the subculture, like you mentioned earlier. Are we noticing this uptick? I think you're getting a lot of individuals who are saying a lot of things and making a lot of claims that they are suggesting are true. And unfortunately, people are buying into it, right? There's snake oil salesmen, and there's a lot of stupid people who are willing to buy that snake oil as well. And unfortunately, you can have someone, for example, say, I have no evidence to support my claim, but I was a soldier on Mars, and I time traveled, and all of this stuff, and provide no data whatsoever or evidence to back it up, and people believe them. And will buy their stuff and support them and donate to their cause and give them money through Patreon or whatever, and watch their show on Gaia, and ultimately produce a lot of noise, whereupon the signal, such as your show, I think, gets lost. Right? There's a lot of crap out there, and
was it you that sent me the email last week?
Which email?
No, I'm just saying all the stuff you just said as a joke. I'm just joking with you. So we're ready to go.
Cult.
What's that?
Join my cult. Yeah.
So we are ready to go into a break. So we are on with MJ Baniyas, and we're going to go on this break, and we'll be back in about 3 minutes. And so we are on Podcast UFO and KGR Radio. And again, my guest is MJ Baniyas. We'll be right back.
All right, gentlemen, we're clear. 3 minutes and 40 seconds in this break, Martin.
3 minutes and 40 seconds.
So you were real close, you betcha.
Oh, wow. Okay.
MJ, great commentary, man. That was spot on. It's always refreshing to hear good common sense on these airwaves here.
Thanks very much. I can't imagine it's easy with running KGRA. You probably get a lot of interesting characters.
Well, he's gone.
I'm here. I got to be honest with you. There's times where I'm ready to just start jamming pencils in my ears.
Yeah.
But I'll just say it. The Corey Goods, the David Wilcox, the Basaggio. That none of them are ever going to find a place here.
No, but some of their fans might, right? And that's the inherent problem.
God, yeah.
Like you still have a business to run. At the end of the day, you still have a business to run, right?
Yep. It's hard. It's hard to keep everybody happy. It's just I don't think you can do it.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. Last week we had Dr. Bob Gross on, who had his theory on Kecksburg, and he had a theory also on Roswell, and boy, have I got a lot of email about that. So,
what was his theory?
His theory is that he thought it was now there was some type of balloon that was coated with aluminum and like a precursor to Mylar PET. I don't remember the long name of it. So that he was basically thinking that it was that actually crashed, and actually was pretty convincing. But since that time, there's been a couple blogs have come out with punching holes and saying that he used selective evidence for that.
Well, it's like this. The United States Air Force, I think it was in 96, was it?
Yeah, something like that.
They come out with this big, thick explanation that had nothing to do with it.
Right.
I mean, developing Mylar technology back then might have been a really big thing, which I don't think it was so much. But, why wouldn't they just come clean with that today when the shit's everywhere? It just didn't make any sense. I'm back here chewing a hole through my seat. You know what I mean? I just want to open this mic up and say, look, man, but I can't do it. I got to sit back and just let these guys do their thing. But
well, everyone's hearing you on YouTube now, just to let you know, and my podcast.
Well, good, because
keep the conversation clean. I'm safe for work. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that. But it makes me wonder, why the U.S. Air Force would go through so much trouble to still cover up something that's everywhere now. It's not top secret. It's not something that needs to be held back.
Or they just don't care. Like they're just not talking about it because literally they just don't care about it. If Roswell was okay. See, I don't want to upset anyone, but let's just for the sake of argument, let's say Roswell is nothing more than Mylar balloon technology that's beyond, what it was in 1947.
I think we have only 20 seconds left, right?
Okay, well, they're not going to come in and they're not going to be like, hey, well, this is actually what it was, and they're going to try and disprove it because they know that nothing's going to happen. At the end of the day, if they came out and said it's Mylar, or it's this advanced technology you had in 47, do you think the UFO community would suddenly be like, oh, yeah, no, they're right. You're right. That's fine. We accept this answer as the truth.
Agreed, but that was an awful big report that came out to cover up plastic.
Right.
True.
Right.
I'll give you that.
So we're going back on.
We're 39 seconds away.
39 seconds? Okay.
39 seconds.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Well, it was an interesting theory. And, it's another theory. And I think that's the name of one of the blogs, another theory out there. Hey, look, Ryan's in the chat room. Hey, Ryan. Ryan Sprague.
I love him. Brother Ryan.
Yep, that's right. So he's, we'll have to say hi to him. And we can take calls. Hopefully the calls will be working. We can take them at the top of the hour, after the top of the hour. So we are coming up 20 seconds away, right?
All right. Martin Sweeper is fired, and Bumper will be rolling in 3 seconds. All right. MJ, you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Martin, you ready?
I'm ready.
Everybody on YouTube ready? All right, here we go, gentlemen. In 5, 4, 3, 2.
Welcome back to Podcast UFO on KGR Radio, kgrradio.com, and my guest is MJ Baniyas, and we're having a lot of fun talking about the UFO subculture. And welcome back. Before the break, you were talking about different aspects of we were talking about the different cult-like aspects of this. Not to really name any names up. I have actually named a name on this show before, Stephen Greer, that has caused me a lot of trouble. So, but there are, I think, on any aspect, like if you go into different parts of paranormal, I'm sure it's the same thing. What is your aspect of this book only focusing on the UFO topic, or is it other aspects as well?
Yeah, it primarily focuses on the UFO community. The problem is there's so much, I guess, sort of bleed through in regards to the paranormal community in general, or just sort of other esoteric concepts that'll often blend into the UFO community. So I've been really struggling to try and sort of delineate it. But at the end of the day, I just don't know if you can all the time. And I think that trying to is making a lot of work for yourself. Or you have to leave certain ideologies and paradigms out of the UFO debate that you just don't want to do if you're doing sort of what I'm doing, which is just a sort of a framework for the subculture. I can't say, people who experience poltergeist activity alongside UFO sightings. I can't keep the UFO sighting, but get rid of the poltergeist activity, right? Because that's their story. So I have to be sort of kind of open to the possibility that the UFO phenomenon is more than just sort of an extraterrestrial sort of physical nuts and bolts, I guess, idea, but it may involve aspects of the mystical or sort of interdimensional or psychosocial or whatever. So I try to encapsulate sort of all of it. But the book isn't just the book isn't really trying to map the subculture. I think that's a task that's impossible. I mean, you can't really do that with any subculture. You can't really sort of say this is it, because ultimately those subcultures change quite quickly over time, and in a short amount of time. So the book is more about trying to figure out how the subculture functions. And I think one way to look at it, and the way I try to look at it in my book, is that sort of people within the UFO subculture have sort of their feet in two worlds. On the one hand, we go about our daily lives. We buy Starbucks. We go to work. We raise our kids. We cut our grass, and we sort of function like that. We shop at Walmart. And then on the other side, we have this strange, not fascination, but we have this strange connection, let's say, to this other world that we're told does not exist, right? We're told that UFOs are delusion, UFOs are all hoaxes, that UFOs are total nonsense. But for some reason, as a community, we don't necessarily listen to those messages, and we tend to, I don't want to use the term believe, but we tend to try to engage with that phenomenon in some way. We talk about it, we debate over it, we speculate, and sometimes we lecture at UFO conferences, and we develop cult-like environments, like your friend Dr. Greer. So we sort of exist in these this dualistic kind of world as a community, and the book tries to figure out how is that possible? How can we sort of go about our daily lives, yet at the same time believe in aliens or believe in interdimensional beings and believe in flying saucers or black triangles or wolves that can be shot at point blank range and not die from Knapp and Kelleher's book Hunt for the Skinwalker, right? Like these sort of odd paranormal phenomena that show up that don't make sense, yet we have no problem going to buy grass seed so we can keep our lawns looking nice and pretty, right? And I think that this is really the weirdness of the subculture. It's not the people who believe in extraterrestrials that are weird at all. It's the fact that we somehow continue to function in our lives with this, I guess, awareness or this idea that we are maybe not alone, at least in some way, in the cosmos or interdimensionally or mystically or spiritually or whatever.
So do you find that there is a difference between a person that has interest in this phenomenon just out of plain interest, perhaps it started by science fiction or someone they know may have had a sighting or something like that? Is there a difference between that person and the person like myself that actually had an unexplained sighting?
Right, and again, this is another sort of inherent problem, right? Which I sort of outline in the book is what is the UFO community? Can we say someone who just watches Ancient Aliens is not a member versus someone who's had an experience is a member? Because the problem is, I would say there's a lot of experiencers out there who would say they're not members at all. They've experienced something strange, something anomalous. They saw a UFO, maybe they had a contact or abduction experience, but they have chosen to never engage with the discourse. They've chosen never to engage in the UFO debate, and they've just walked away from it.
Yes.
Are they members or are they not members? So what is really the important aspect here versus someone who just watches Ancient Aliens and posts on Facebook and has forum discussions and engages with that discourse, even though their sort of source material is typically flawed? What would they then maybe be part of that discourse more so? You know, like we sort of dance around these issues, and I think that it's difficult to delineate who is in and who is not in. That is really the problem.
Wow. We have some questions coming in from the chat, and I'll get to one of them. But first of all, I just wanted to tell you quickly, and I have told this story before on this show, but it still kind of blows my mind. I'm friends with someone that's on the Antiques Roadshow, so he doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't want to talk about his experience. But when he was in college at Amherst, he was in there's some towers. The dorms are in like these towers, and he was like on the 23rd floor or something with a bunch of his buddies. He said, yes, we were drinking, but it wasn't a hallucination. He wasn't that drunk. He just had a little bit of a buzz on. And he said all of a sudden they noticed out this window this thing comes swooping in, and they looked at it, and it was shaped like a box, like a perfect box. You know, it wasn't, you know, it was like a square, almost like a cube, but rectangular. And it had lights flashing all around it. And then he said they were all just staring at it, and then it shot up in the sky. And he said just then a fighter jet went toward it, but before it could get anywhere near it, the thing burst into 5 lights. And he said the lights seemed to be reacting back and forth to each other. And then by the time the jet got close to it, he said the lights just shut off. He said so fast you couldn't hardly see it. So I said, my goodness. I said, how do you feel about that? I mean, that's amazing. Did it change your life? He said, I could give a, you know what? He says, I don't care. I could care less. And so there are those people. And so I think that's kind of interesting that you're kind of including those people as part of this subculture, or where do they fit?
And that's the problem, right? Like, we don't know where they fit. I think fundamentally, I would have to say that, you know, to try, because you need to delineate somewhere, right? You need to have a line somewhere, but it's tough to find all the time. I think that if people communicate about it, right? If there is some sort of discourse or debate and they're engaging with that, then I think that they're part of the community, at least in some way. If they are not engaging at all, if they've had a strange experience like your friend and they've chosen to just say, forget it, I don't care, and they never talk about it again, they never even think about it, you know, can we say that they're part of the community? Can we say that they're part of the subculture? I think they're part of a community for sure, a community that's had an experience, or a community that, or a subculture that has had an anomalous experience. But I wouldn't say they're really part of the conversation. And I think the conversation is really what the UFO subculture is. It's the back and forth. It's the communication over the UFO phenomenon that is really what shapes the phenomenon in a way, right? We create our theories and our hypotheses, and that is really what kind of breathes life into it, because we can talk about it. If we didn't do any of that, we wouldn't have a UFO subculture at all, right? It's all about the communication.
Interesting. And how does this fit into, like, to say when the people that go to conferences, or they, you know, I mean, is that all part of this too? Like, someone puts out some money to actually travel and go and be there at these conferences?
For sure. I think that's a whole separate. I think that's a sort of that's a subculture. I think the UFO conference culture is a sort of a separate beast. It is part of the same thing. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, it is part of the UFO subculture, but it's definitely its own kind of little version of it, I think, because there's a lot of things that happen at conferences. And there's a lot of, I would say the communication of the UFO topic at a conference is like in hyperdrive there, right? Like, it's not just, you know, over the computer, or it's not just over texting, or it's not just over Messenger, or it's not just over the phone, but you're actually interacting with individuals who have had anomalous experiences, or you're interacting with individuals who are engaged in investigation or constant discourse. So, yeah, it's a total separate thing. I gotta be honest, if I was gonna write a second book, I would go to every UFO conference I could and just write about that. Like, I think that would be, like, my next project would be to take the UFO subculture and, like, let's compartmentalize even more. And I want to do a book on conference culture, because I think it would be unbelievable. And it'd be crazy and wild. I mean, there's the people at those conferences, some of them, like, they dress up and they sell crystals, and yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I mentioned last week about how Roswell has become commercialized in a way. I mean, it's such a, and not only the once a year parade coming up in a couple of weeks, but not only that, but the town itself, restaurants being named after certain things, and spaceships on signs and stuff like that, and a lot of people are really, really into it.
Oh, I mean, Roswell's the town that it has a vested interest now in maintaining the fact that something strange happened there, right? Like they cannot, even if there's an explanation that comes out and it's proven, they would have to fight against it, right? Because ultimately, economically, that the UFO crash at Roswell is Roswell, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Last week's guest would not fare well in that town walking down the street.
I wouldn't go. No, yeah.
So from the chat room, what are your thoughts on the co-creation hypothesis as presented by Greg Bishop, and how do you feel about the hypothesis that the hypotheses stand up for ETH and others? ETH.
I think we talked about this. This was the topic of our last talk. I think when I was on last time, we talked about co-creation a bit. Yeah. So if you're asking me whether I believe co-creation is the answer, I think it's a pretty viable theory or a hypothesis. I don't know if it's an answer. My interest in UFOs is sort of, again, more around people and the culture and the community. But I've written sort of several articles about Greg Bishop's co-creation hypothesis as I think a good sort of good middle ground guess, I think. The problem with, if we sort of zoom out on the UFO narrative and look at it from a bird's eye view, unfortunately, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, sort of as a nuts and bolts phenomena of, a bunch of meat bodies jumping into a ship and flying here and doing stuff, I don't think it generally fits all the time with the entire narrative. Typically, if you want to go with ETH, you have to start leaving certain aspects out, or you have to start calling certain people sort of delusional or fakes or hoaxers or they're just too woo-woo, because ultimately their mythology or their ideology doesn't fit into the ETH paradigm. However, on the flip side of that, there are aspects of the UFO phenomenon that are very material and physical, right? They tend to show up on radar every once in a while. They show up on gun camera footage now. They leave depression marks, or at least they used to. I haven't had a good UFO landing case in a while. When's the last time a UFO landed in a field with legs and stood? Anyway.
Yeah, that's true. Right.
When? Yeah. So you at times have physical evidence or trace evidence, I guess you call it, left behind. In sort of the UFO narrative. So I think co-creation tries to sort of find itself nicely in the middle between something that's more mystical and not immaterial or psychosocial, and something that's more nuts and bolts physical. And I think it tries to place itself in the middle, which is why I kind of like it. But again, one I guess issue that I've since thought about in regards to co-creation is it comes off sometimes as a bit of sort of like a theory of everything, sort of Hawking-esque theory of everything solution. And maybe the UFO phenomenon is not that. Maybe the UFO phenomenon is not one thing, but rather a smorgasbord of a whole bunch of things. Maybe we are dealing with a few sort of nuts and bolts extraterrestrial ideas. Maybe we're dealing with some mystical or sort of interdimensional hypotheses, and maybe we're dealing with some psychosocial, and maybe they're sort of coalescing or working together, or just totally separate, and we're just experiencing it. So I think we also need to sort of think about whether we fit into the camp of there is one thing, and that is the cause of all UFO experience, or are we dealing with a whole smattering of things that are just sort of coincidentally all occurring simultaneously for us. But yeah, I dig co-creation. I do.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I don't think there is. If there's an answer out there to what people are seeing and witnessing, I don't think it's. I don't think it's one thing. It just seems like there's too many variables in what people are experiencing to be just one thing. And so we are gonna. We have about less than 10 minutes to the break, and then after that, we're going to take calls. So what about the abductee or experiencer, as they're mostly called now? What about that aspect of that? Is your book going to touch into any part of that?
A bit, for sure. I tried to tie in sort of as many different sort of ideas from the UFO narrative as I could. So I think I think UFO experiencers or contactees, abductees, I think they're sort of the most interesting. I think that really when we think about those people who have their foot now in two worlds, right? Someone who has had a contact experience or an abduction experience really now dwells in this weird in-between zone, this sort of no man's land, if you will, this gap between their daily lives and this life that has been totally, I guess, interrupted or disconnected from sort of the normal daily world. I mean, I can't imagine going about my business and then all of a sudden being abducted or having this amazing contact experience. I can't imagine how it would affect me.
No kidding.
It would,
yeah.
Right? So how do you then pick yourself back up? How do you then, wake up the next morning and go, well, I'm going to get my, venti latte from Starbucks? I mean, you probably can't, right? You sort of, you've been the victim of something, or if it's a contact experience, you've been sort of enlightened in some way to the point where you sort of don't recognize the normal world as being real anymore. And I think that this is one thing that the UFO subculture often sort of engages in is realizing that sort of the daily reality you and I live in is not necessarily sort of true or objective or I guess it could be objective, but it's not really sort of honest in a sense. If aliens are real, or if interdimensional beings are real, or if mystical, non-human entities are roaming around in our, universal consciousness, paying your taxes or getting a mortgage seems ridiculous when, we're potentially one species in a chorus of others that are intelligent, and how do we continue to live our lives? And when it comes to abduction and contact, I think this is sort of to the nth degree, right? This is really the big challenge. Can you go back to your old life, and does your old life seem normal, or are you sort of like Dorothy after the tornado, right? You've gone to Oz and now you're back, and life just seems sort of colorless, right? It doesn't seem real anymore. There's something wrong with it. And this is, I think, fundamentally where abduction, contactee, sort of individual experiencers sort of fit. They're Dorothy, and they've come back, and they're trying to figure out where the hell the color went.
I've said a number of times in the show, like, if the abduction experience was happening to me, I couldn't function. I just don't know how I could possibly go on with my life. And by the way, someone's saying hi from Starbucks in the chat room. But I mean, how could you go to like Starbucks and just like live the normal life after something like that? I mean, I don't get it. If these people are truly being abducted, kudos to them for trying to fit in, because I certainly would have a hard time doing that myself.
Right, and I'm not going to sit here and say every single abduction case or every single contact case is legitimate, because we can't say that. I think that there's going to be plenty of frauds and plenty of hoaxers out there. You can't believe everybody, I suppose. But I would say that there's probably a good chunk of them that I would say are legitimate in some way. Again, I can't make a truth claim as to the source of the UFO phenomenon. So if a person was abducted, or if a person has a contact experience, I don't know what happened to them. I'm not even sure if they know what happened to them. But whatever did happen to them, it's affected them. So to them, it's as real as possible. Because ultimately, they're the ones who have to sort of live their lives with this new understanding, or this sort of new interpretation of the world.
And the strange thing is, it happens. People are claiming this all over the world, and who do they confide in? If they don't have anyone to talk to, I mean, it must be, possibly it could be some of them could be sleep paralysis. I don't want to step on any toes out
Sure.
there for, because I do know that, people they like see images of like beings, that's not uncommon in sleep paralysis,
Sure. But I don't think you're gonna step on any toes. I mean, ultimately, we have to still remain critical. It's okay to ask people, are you sure it's not sleep paralysis? Because ultimately, I have to be honest. If I think, like, I've actually had this conversation with my wife. Like, if I woke up one morning convinced I was abducted.
Really? Wow.
No. Oh, no. No, sorry. No. What I'm saying is, if I did, like, if I had that experience.
I thought for sure you said I did.
No.
Okay.
If I woke up one morning.
You heard it here, folks. Yeah.
No. If I woke up one morning thinking that I was abducted, I would hope that I would have sort of the wherewithal to sort of sit there and say, maybe I should go see a psychiatrist first. Maybe I wasn't actually abducted. Maybe I had some sort of fugue state, or maybe sleep paralysis, or maybe there's something sort of, maybe there's sort of an error in my functioning, right? Because ultimately, that I think is a lot better than the reality that there's a species roaming around that has that just kidnaps people randomly for sort of various reasons, and does so without any ethical or moral issue, and just simply treats us as test subjects without our consent. I think that is much more frightening than me just losing my mind a little bit. So I think it's okay to be critical. I think we have to be critical. I think we can't sit here and say every single story is true. But again, we have to be cautious, because the inherent problem is no one can prove anything in this field. So I have to make a judgment call, I suppose, and we all have to make judgment calls. Who do we believe and who do we not believe? And this becomes problematic, because I'm honest, like, you go to a UFO convention. I'm going to say something here that's going to maybe hurt some feelings, but half the speakers up there that go up and lecture are full of nonsense and garbage, and they're there because it's a cottage industry, and they like the glory and the money, quote unquote, and just the attention. So
I think it's based more, if I had to pick between the two, I would say it's more based on attention than it would be for the money, because there's no. That's a misconception. There's no real money in this field. Only for the, for the ones that one person I mentioned earlier, and a few others. There's not really a lot of money, and we're about ready to go into break. So, so why don't we do that? We're going to go into the break, and so you're listening to Podcast UFO. I'm Martin Willis, and my guest is MJ Baniyas, and we'll be right back right after this break.
And we're clear. And just over 3.5 minutes in this break, gang.
Okay, 3.5 minutes.
Right.
I'll set my timer. Thank you. So I'm not sure where you want to go when we come back, but we will start taking calls. It's hard to always guess how many calls we're going to get. Sometimes no one calls in. Sometimes we do get 3 or 4 calls. So
hey, I'm down for whatever. If people want to give me a call, I'll take it.
Yeah,
I enjoy it. Yep.
Yeah, good. So we talked a little bit this afternoon. So we have about 3 minutes left. And you were talking about the Nimitz pilot.
No, not the pilot. The
I'm
radar.
sorry. That's right. The radar. That's right.
Yeah.
Daly's his name.
Day.
Yeah.
Kevin Day.
Kevin.
Getting this all wrong.
Yeah. You're doing okay.
Yeah.
He was on Phenomenon Radio Thursday night. Amazing guy.
And he was on Coast to Coast.
Sunday night.
2 nights ago. Yeah.
Sunday night.
Sunday,
with,
right?
George
With
Knapp.
George Knapp. Yeah.
We broke him Thursday night though on Phenomenon Radio. John Burroughs working with some people were successful in.
Oh, I heard about that. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was an amazing interview. It wasn't so much like a classic interview like you would normally think, guys. It was more like a couple of old military cats just sitting back talking about stuff, you know?
Yeah, I did listen to it. It's interesting though. I mean, there's a lot happening in the background, I think, with this, and especially with maybe To the Stars a little bit, and George Knapp, and I don't know. There's a whole backstory here that, you know, I don't know what's going on here. But he sounds like
that's a part of it. That might be a good part for you to research for your book. Because outside of conferences, because, you know, people have a big misconception about conferences. Conferences aren't a place where, you know, really sought after information is broke. It's where people get together and they commune. You know what I mean? That's what these conferences are. A chance for people to get close to the people that they admire and see them in person, just like a concert, a musical concert, or, you know, one of these Antique Roadshow things that, you know, like Martin does. I mean, they're fans of that. I'm a fan of Antique Roadshow, for the love of it. But at the end of the day, you know, there is a group of people that will never see the light of day, will never do media. They'll never come forward. They've worked behind the scenes for 40, 50 years on this.
Yeah.
And they use proxies, if you will, people that they can convey to and they can disseminate information when they want it to get out. But you're very right about, you know, sort of this moving and shaking behind the scenes. I'm 100% with you.
Yeah, Kevin Day is an interesting story. I mean, ultimately, he wrote a book where he fictionalized this event. And about 7 years ago, he wrote the book. I think it was 2010, where he tells this story. Yeah. So it's interesting. You know, I believe he was there. I believe he's the real deal. I have no qualms there. It's interesting that sort of there's this whole backstory. If you start going to archives of for the Above Top Secret website, you can sort of find all of these old posts from him. And then he had a post, I think, in 2017 where he sort of came out and said something about it. And now he's sort of like you say, he broke on Phenomena Radio a few days ago. So
I think we're out of time, aren't we? Are we out of time?
Yeah, we're ready to go when you guys are.
Okay. All right, we'll go back.
All
right, you can go ahead and count down.
All right, here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2.
Welcome back to Podcast UFO on KGR Radio, kgrradio.com. My guest is MJ Baniyas, and we were just discussing basically the abduction part of the aspect of this, that part of the subculture. So I wanted to tell you just real quickly, there's a friend of the show that had a series going on. It was called Milgram and the Fast Walkers. And basically, he was actually played a part in this miniseries. You can find it online. It's actually pretty good. And basically, it was a girl that was getting abducted and just had all the signs of it and just, you know, went to a therapist like you're talking about, a doctor first and then a therapist and all that. And I think that is like if someone is having this, you know, in their life and they can't really explain it, but they're just totally confused, I think you're right. I think starting with a therapist and maybe get some medical checks. But I'm wondering how many therapists out there actually, and I've heard that there are some that will refer people to someone like Yvonne Smith or something like that, you know, to do some regression, you know, hypno regression. What do you think about all that part of it?
Yeah, you know, I think hypnotic regression has very, I think we bump into a lot of problems with it. I think there's a lot of allegations that hypnotic regression will create false memories, that often hypnotherapists will, whether on purpose or by accident, lead the client or to a certain set of beliefs about what happened. So I think we need to be cautious. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an expert in psychology, so I can't sort of comment too much, and I want to be careful. But I would say that if I suffered from sort of an event like this, I probably wouldn't want someone who's involved in the UFO subculture in any way to check me out. I wouldn't want to have that sort of set ideology be present in my mind as I'm, being evaluated or being helped. The bigger problem, though, is I'm already part of the subculture, right? I'm already engaged in this this world. So if I have a strange sort of anomalous experience, like an abduction or a contact event, am I already going to kind of pull information that's already in my head about the UFO phenomena or about the UFO discourse and push it into, oh my God, I've been abducted, whatever. I think really the more compelling cases of abduction and contact are people who are not part of the UFO community, at least not before they get abducted. I think that those are sort of the more interesting ones, because ultimately they have nothing really to draw on. They have no paradigm that they use to say, I was abducted by Greys or I was abducted by this or that. They just simply had an experience and they just sort of talk about it. So I don't know. The witness in my book that I sort of use a lot, that I sort of interview a lot, she was never a member of the UFO community before. She's I can't reveal too much, but she was a former flight attendant, lives on a farm now with her husband, just sort of living her daily life, and all of a sudden anomalous stuff started happening, and she reached out. So this was sort of a compelling case for me to investigate and look into. Now, she's never had an abduction, at least not that she can recall. She does have a few moments, I would say, of maybe what we could call missing time, but she has no recollection of anything sort of in that time. And she's also telling herself, maybe I just screwed up on telling time, or maybe I just made a mistake, versus her, going down that rabbit hole and telling herself, well, clearly I've been abducted by something. So that's sort of where, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I really lost my train of thought there.
Yeah, the missing time part of this is I always find that interesting, because people have talked about, situations like that going way back. I mean, it's not a new thing. It's, people have talked about it all the way back into the, 50s.
Right, and I would say even longer. I mean, I think people,
Probably.
We probably have missing time cases of individuals. I think it was brought up in either Valet's book, Passport to Magonia, of I think individuals who would sort of go into this sort of fairyland, and to them they've been gone for 5 minutes, partying with these elves or whatever, and they come back and they've been gone for 5 years. So I think you have sort of missing time sort of mythology that's existed sort of for a long time in sort of the paranormal world, or in the mystical sort of monster / fairy world. I don't know what you call that. That sort of the mythological world, say.
That sounds good. That's a good blanket. Anyway, we are taking calls now. If anyone wants to call in, that number's up on the screen if you're listening to YouTube, and we will take calls if anyone wants to call in. Someone was a little offended. I don't know if you want to address any part of it, but they were a little bit offended about the conference. I can't remember exactly what you said about it, but maybe the fact that they think you haven't gone to any conferences or whatever. Have you attended conferences?
I will be totally honest. I have not attended a single UFO conference. I've attended like paranormal conferences. I've attended esoteric style conferences, but I've never actually attended a UFO conference. And the reason is there's none in my area. I would have to board a plane and fly.
Yeah, you're in Manitoba, right?
I am, yeah. Sort of smack dab in the middle of the country. And I also, recently started a family, so I have a 2.5-year-old daughter and a 1-year-old. A 1-year-old. Oh, you can hear her screaming. Yeah, she wants to come downstairs and see what's going on down here. But I think my wife is sort of trying to keep her occupied. So if a little girl pops up here, you'll know she made it past the guard. But yeah, I recently started a family, so the last 3 years of my life have been sort of dedicated to wife and kids.
Sure.
So yeah, my plan is to attend a conference as soon as possible, at least in regards to the UFO phenomena.
Right. We've had calls trying to come in. I'm not sure exactly what's happening. Someone may want to try to Skype me instead, and the calls they came in and hung up. So that Skype, my username in Skype is Marty Willis. That's MartyWillis, and don't call me Marty. Whose name is
in
available.
regard,
What's
in
that?
regards, I hope I didn't sort of, and I meant no offense. I don't necessarily recall what I said. I know I mentioned, people, they're sort of strange and wild in the sense that people dress up and they sell crystals and all that. So if it's about that, I apologize. I don't want to offend sort of the crystal dealers.
That's okay. We have a caller on the line. So caller, your first name, where are you calling from?
This is Ryan from South Carolina.
Oh, Ryan. Hey, Ryan, just a quick question. Did you dial the number or did you Skype in on the username?
I just dialed a number.
Okay. All right. Strange why it didn't work for the last person that was trying to reach out. Anyway, Ryan has called a number of times. He's I guess he's sort of a resident skeptic in a way. Ryan, is that a good way to term you?
I guess I'm probably closer to what Stanton Friedman calls a healthy agnostic. How about that?
Okay, we'll take that. You have a question for MJ?
Well, actually, a quick comment. I mean, you were talking earlier about someone in the chat room getting upset about a comment he made about UFO conferences because he said a percentage of them, I forget what percentage it is, of them are frauds, and I actually kind of share his view on that. I'm not going to give a percentage, but that's what the person was upset about. Anyway, he can talk to that if he wants to. But my question was, what was since abductions had come up, what's his opinion on some of the more famous abductee cases like Betty and Barney Hill or Bob Matthews or some of those?
Yeah, it's really tough. The problem is the more famous the case, the longer it's been talked about and written about, the more it's sort of become mythologized, right? So you start to lose grip on sort of what really happened versus what are aspects of the story that have been added later. It's similar to the game of telephone that maybe you played when you were a kid, right? You start off with a phrase, and then as the phrase kind of gets whispered into ears down the line, you end up at the end with something totally different. I think the more we continue to discuss and try to find information on, or I guess people write about or present at conferences on, the information from the original event changes. We see this sort of happen all the time with UFO witnesses as well, right? As time goes on, stuff from the story starts to get a little fuzzy or starts to shift and change, and it doesn't stay 100% the same, as all stories sort of do, right? All stories will change over time. Memory starts to fade, or you start talking to people and their ideas or their concepts start to kind of infiltrate into yours. So if you're asked, I can't necessarily comment on whether Betty and Barney Hill were abducted. I wasn't there to witness it. But do I think that their story has maybe changed over time, or it's been sort of lionized so much and mythologized so much that it's not necessarily sort of the authentic tale it once was? Yeah, I think so. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir, it does.
Oh, perfect.
We think of the Travis Walton case. Someone brought that up a moment ago in the chat room.
Yeah, and Travis Walton is another sort of great case, right? That again, over time, we might see slight variations of what happened. Not because he's lying, or not because he's sort of trying to mislead us or anything. I don't think that at all. I just think, as myths develop over time, and the Travis Walton case very much has a mythology behind it. Same thing with Betty and Barney Hill. Same with the Andreessen abductions and the Cahill abduction. Like, they're all kind of developing this mythos around them, and it sort of forms this bubble of other information, and trying to find now the kernel of truth, or really the kernel of actual data that is useful. We have to kind of travel through this large maze now of all these new ideas or even changes. And not only that, people will purposefully also add to the story or change the story to mess with the story as well. So you not only have to deal with people who are sort of doing it by accident or have honest intentions and are screwing up, but also people who are sort of going out of their way to purposefully convolute the story so that it comes off as fraudulent or fake, when in reality something did happen. So I think we just need to be cautious when we deal with sort of these big cases. I think we sort of need to maybe recognize that myth happens, and that's it. I do want to. Can I quickly touch back on we talked about the conference thing?
Sure.
And I said I did say 50%, and I listen. I can't say every single conference is 50%. I was just sort of making a general statement, but I do think a percentage, let's say, a good number, a decent handful of individuals who take the stage are doing it because for them it's a cottage industry, or it's something that they're doing not because they want to be honest or truthful, but because it gets them attention. So yeah, and I won't say any names, but we'll stop there because I don't want to offend anyone else.
Well, along those lines, I just have to say, as far as getting guests on the shows, I always like having, the people that are part of the cottage industry, but also there's a lot of people that I respect that are a part of that as well. And
Right.
And also, I really enjoy getting people on when I can that have never been on any UFO show before. There's been a few of them that I've had on. It's hard to get them because a lot of times they just plain don't want to talk about it.
Right.
And the sad part of that is you can see the downloads much less. If they're an unknown, they'll get very low downloads, except under certain circumstances. We had Selma Siddick was on. She was one of the Ariel School phenomena people that we have very, very, that's one of my highest downloaded shows. So there are circumstances. And by the way, just to make this quick announcement, I got a text from Randall Nickerson, who's doing the film Ariel School Phenomena coming out. He's been working on it, I think, for 7 years or longer. So he texted me today. He says, getting very near the end. And by the way, I'm going to be going to a conference, the MUFON conference in late July, and I'm going to meet him there. I've met Randy a number of times, but anyway, I'm going to meet also Selma's going to be there, and I'm going to try to do a live show if possible from the conference. I've already cleared it with MUFON. So, but moving on, the call number is up on the line. Oh, are you all set, Ryan? I forgot you were on the line still. Thanks.
No, I'm so quiet.
Yeah.
I'll make one last comment.
Sure
and,
thing.
We'll say about those conferences. I've been to a grand total of one, but I will say, the ones I've seen, at the height of the Roswell controversy, there was a lot of crossfire between a lot of researchers, not to name names. So there isn't just blind acceptance out there. There is, by a lot of researchers, critical evaluation. So I think that's one very positive thing you can say about it.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think researchers, and this is a very sort of this comes up a lot in my book in regards to UFO subculture in general. Is sort of ufologists and researchers are very quick to go after one another. It's like wolves fighting for the alpha position a little bit sometimes. So that's good. I agree. I think where we bump into problems is when you have people who are not researchers and they just sort of blindly follow one individual or they deem one person sort of the expert, and they sort of just tag along without reading anyone else or without any sort of critical thought. They just kind of buy into the message. That's, I think, where I get kind of concerned in regards to some of the conference culture, let's say.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Ryan.
Okay, we'll see you later.
All right, I'll talk to you next time. So that line is open if anyone wants to call. The phone number is up on the screen on YouTube. You're welcome to call in or Skype in at Marty Willis if you'd like to. Getting back to what we were talking about, let's kind of change gears a little bit. And what's your thoughts on To the Stars Academy? How does that fit into where you're going with everything?
To the Stars is such an interesting idea, and it's so funny because when you're writing a book, you don't. It's not like an article or a blog post that sort of comes out immediately. You need to be sort of thinking 2 years, 3 years, and all of that. If you want your book to still be read, 10 years into the future. And I have sort of had to reconcile in my own mind: is To the Stars going to be something that's going to be around for another decade, or is it going to sort of exist for a while and then sort of go away? One thing that was sort of pointed out by George Hansen, he's the author of The Trickster and the Paranormal. He sort of says any organizations that deal with like ghost hunting or paranormal hunting or even UFO investigations, they tend to sort of pop up, and then chaos ensues, and then they collapse, and then they disappear. And we can probably go through tons of small little organizations that investigated UFOs that no longer exist and existed maybe for a few years and then disappeared, predominantly due to infighting. So is To the Stars going to be one of those? I hope not. I hope To the Stars sort of survives and weathers the storm and is able to keep its act together. One thing they do have is a long list of individuals involved in it with sort of serious ufological pedigrees, right? We're not dealing with...
And other pedigrees, yeah. Science and
yeah.
DOD and all that.
Yeah, they're a sort of invisible college, right? In a sense, they're definitely sort of what Valet meant in a way. They're this sort of public invisible college, but they're an invisible college for sure. So you have a good list of individuals. We can debate whether all of them are good or not or whatever. I mean, I'm not going to make claims, but I think what you have at To the Stars is sort of a lot of access that the vast majority of us in the UFO community don't have. They can muster a lot of individuals within government and within private interests who have good access to capital to do investigations and to do research. I know that they've taken a lot of flack in regards to some of their videos, and I know they've taken a lot of flack in regards to some of the photos they've released and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I would have to say, who else is doing what they're doing? It's no one, really.
Right. We have a caller. I just want to say we're having some type of issue there's a lot of people trying to call in, and only like 1 out of 3 of those people I can actually join to the call, and I apologize for that. I'm not sure what's going on, why some I can and some I cannot. But caller, thanks for calling. You got through. What's your first name and where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Steven. I'm calling from Oregon.
Oh, Steven, you were trying to call me, right?
Yeah, but I was calling through Skype, and the Skype didn't work, so I called the number, and that's how I finally got through.
All right, so I'll just tell people not to use the Skype name. Anyway, thanks for your persistence. You got through. So you have a question for our guest?
Just a couple comments and something, see if he noticed. I've noticed it with all the Rendlesham guys, with Kevin Randall and Don Schmidt, and just about every author and person who speaks at the conferences. They always add stuff to their story, and pretty significant stuff. They change their story pretty significantly so they can get more people out. They got to have something new, and that seems to be. I've been listening to this stuff for many years, reluctantly, but I saw something when I was a kid, so I've kind of had to keep my toe in the pool of ufology because there's nowhere else you can find out anything about this stuff. But do you see that? I mean, everybody in the Rendlesham case has added very significant to their story. Travis Walton has completely changed his story.
I have to disagree with you as far as maybe you know something that I don't, but one of the people I've thought all along, and MJ, sorry for me jumping in, but I haven't seen Travis change his story. So I'm interested.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In the beginning, you go back and find YouTube videos of Travis Walton back in the beginning, back in the early ones, back in the 90s. And I mean, it happened back in the 70s, but there's YouTube videos of him back in the 70s. He didn't remember anything. And then, magically a few years later, not only is he remember everything, he's interpreting everything. Now, at first, he didn't remember anything, and then he's interpreting, well, I think they were trying to save me. They were trying to help me.
Right.
And he's totally changed. He's totally changed his original version of the event. The original version of the event was he didn't remember anything at all.
And you can actually find that on. You're saying you can actually find that on YouTube.
Oh yeah, yeah. You can definitely find it out there. Yeah, but you have to go way back, and that's what they all do. I mean, look at the Rendlesham guys. The way they've, what's his name?
Jim Peniston.
I can't remember the
Jim Peniston.
Yeah, Jim Peniston, who had the binary downloads.
Yeah, that's
one
that's questionable. But one of the people I do think is pretty solid in that and has kind of really kept things the same as Charles Halt.
Well, not really. Charles Halt has one really big problem to answer for. Is this was this was an Air Force base in the middle of the Cold War that had nukes on site, and his one-page memo says.
Are you there? I think we lost our call.
And they didn't scramble a plane or pick up a phone?
He has never admitted, and he won't admit, matter of fact, he got offended when I asked him if there were nukes on the base, and I don't know if we know for sure if there were.
Yes, we do, because they in interviews that they've done through the years, Peniston and some of the other ones, Kabanzak and some of the other ones, they've said, yes, there were nukes on site, and the way they danced around it was they said, okay, so we were at the storage units that were labeled non-nuclear storage, implying clearly, and that's specifically why they were doing it, implying clearly that there was nuclear storage on the base. I mean, that's where the big planes, that was the base where the big planes went out of, not the little jets.
So, Stephen, let me get this straight. You're questioning why Halt didn't call to have military flights checking the object out. Is that what you're saying?
Well, okay, so it wasn't object, it was objects, and Colonel Halt added to his story to. In the beginning, he just had his tape recording. You go back and find the early interviews with Halt, and then 10, 15 years later, all of a sudden there's beams coming down and hitting the ground near his feet. And that's Charles Halt. That's not the other guys.
Isn't that on the recording? Isn't that on the tape recording? Doesn't he say something about that? On the audio recording?
No. No, he does not.
I have to listen to that again because I thought that was mentioned.
Can I jump in? I mean,
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. No. Just to kind of get back to the original question or the original comment. I think people. I mean, in regards to stories, right? That we sort of tell. I think, it's like when your grandpa tells you, he caught this fish, and when he first tells a story, it was this big, and then it got this big, and now it's. I think we just naturally, interpret the story and change the story as time goes on because maybe we sort of hear other stories or other stories that were similar. Like in regards to Travis Walton, for example, he's interpreting it now because ultimately it happened to him 40 years ago, and now maybe he's trying to make sense of it. I agree. I think when it was fresh and it just happened, for sure, maybe he was sort of unable to interpret it because he didn't have the time that it would require to sort of heal, I guess, the mental wounds, let's say, he suffered, assuming it happened.
Well, that's one take on it.
Yeah.
Another take on it might be that, he wants to sensationalize it and open up an entire, new area of...
Yeah, and you know what? Obviously we could debate that, right? We could say, maybe he is sort of maybe he did have some sort of experience, but now, as time is going on and maybe interest is waning, he needs to stay relevant for sure. I mean, it is debatable, right? We ultimately don't have really any necessarily evidence either or, right? Like, it's not like he can, produce, a piece of the ship or something to say, here you go, it actually happened.
Perfect. So my question really comes down to this. So what would somebody, early in the show, Martin said that, he had a sighting. Right. And so it has caused this perpetual curiosity in this. And I'm the same way. I saw something back in the very late 60s. I know what I saw. I know what it wasn't. I don't want to get into it. Where does somebody like me go that doesn't want to listen to people who claim to be abducted, who doesn't want to listen to bases on the moon, who doesn't want to listen to somebody explain how Bigfoot works as a lookout for UFOs, who just wants to listen to the Kevin Days of the world?
I would say don't go to Contact in the Desert.
Chris will be talking about that next week, actually.
I have to be honest, man. You're sort of preaching to the choir here a little bit, because I've had this conversation on other sort of shows and podcasts where I take issue with the cottage industry of sort of the UFO conference. I understand that people want to see sort of the public figures of ufology, but I get really weary when somebody says they're a UFO expert. How can you be an expert on something unidentified? You fundamentally can't be. You can be an expert in history, and you have studied the history of UFO sightings. I can sort of see that, but you can't be really an expert on, flying saucers, let's say. So I get. Oh, my daughter has a boo-boo on her toe. Sorry. Sorry. It's just chaos up there. I don't know what's going on. But they're here. They're here to get me.
You'll have missing time soon.
You hear that?
Yeah.
Is it pandemonium? Yeah, missing time.
Yeah.
So anyway, back to I don't know where I can send you. I mean, ultimately, I think every sort of UFO conference is going to have its fair share of individuals who claim expertise and who claim that they have the truth. When in reality, we have to be careful who we listen to, and we have to be careful, I think, of what people say. And I'd be honest, as someone who tries to do sort of as much legitimate research as possible, it's really problematic when people start making ridiculous claims that they can't back up and saying that it's real or true. I wish I had a place to send you. I wish we could sort of bring back some more traditional conferences that sort of hovered more around having to provide citations versus just talking out of your butt.
I mean, as Martin, do you know anybody who's ever explored actually carving off a section of ufology that's just really kind of the Kevin Days of the world? And
there's I'm going to ask you to email me. There is a guy that has started a group, and there's a few out there that have tried to initiate groups that are really balanced and try to look at things scientifically. So I can't say it off the top of my head, but
it's the I know one is called SCU. I think it's the Scientific Coalition for Ufology.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Is that Robert Powell who started that? And he's got a lot of. There's a lot of, I would say, sort of PhDs and experts sort of in their respective fields. A lot of guys out of the military, for sure, also involved.
All right, thanks.
So yeah, if you sort of just Google the Scientific Coalition for Ufology or something like that.
It's very close. Yeah.
SCU. Yeah, if you just Google like SCU and then Robert Powell, you'll find it. And they're sort of putting it all together right now. I think they're still in their sort of infant stages still, but they're definitely sort of one of those groups that you could probably even email and get involved with. It's tough to find. Sorry. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. It's a really good topic. It's a shame that ufology doesn't do a better job of. I think it does such a disservice to itself.
Okay.
By perpetuating that.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much. I really appreciate the call.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
All right. Have a good night. And we have another caller just called in. What's your name? Your first name, and where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Ronald from Minnesota.
Hi, Ronald. Thanks for the call. Do you have a question for our guest?
thank you for your show tonight. First of all, I wanted to say thank you for your show on Tuesday night on the podcast here. Really interesting to see a live show and to watch behind the scenes and see some of the stuff going on. And thank you for the information. And I think there's always a good dose of skepticism that we must kind of keep active in order to keep our sanity about us. I think that when we see a light in the sky, for instance, it's not automatically a UFO. First, I have to establish if it's an airplane or a helicopter or something like that before I establish if it's not those, you know. But I met a couple of MUFON people last month in May when I went to go visit for the Pine Bush event that didn't happen when you had the tornadoes. And I got to meet some MUFON people there, and they were very sincere about what they believed in, and they weren't pushing anything about ufology or anything like that. They were one is Mark D'Antonio. He's more of a science guy,
Right.
and he researches from a science point of view. If he does see something strange, then he tries to evaluate it, and he has explained that several times. And I appreciate what he has shared on that weekend and things like that. Then you had Eric. He's a Massachusetts MUFON director. Another interesting person, and I think he's sincere about what he's saying and what he talks about. So the question that I have is, you were talking about a percentage of people that might not be truthful or honest or kind of skeptical in some ways. How can you put a percentage on a group of people that may or may not be telling the truth? But if they are telling the truth, should we evaluate it on our own level first and try to perceive, on our own understanding whether or not it's a fact or fiction or whatever? And I'll go ahead and take the call, and I'll take the answer off the air, off the phone.
All right, Ronald, thank you.
Thanks for the call.
Thanks, Ronald.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. Maybe I my foot in my mouth here a little bit. I said 50%, and maybe that's an inaccurate number. Maybe it's a little high, but I think I'm taking a lot of heat over the 50%. I think the last caller sort of made a good point. I think there's a lot. I'm not saying that every single person who lectures at a conference is fraudulent or is trying to sell you something. But I think that like I said, there is a bit of a cottage industry here. I think that, you can there's a bit of a litmus test you can sort of do in regards to whether someone is going to be sort of a legitimate researcher, let's say, versus someone who just wants to sell you something. I think if they're claiming to be an expert in something versus saying, we don't really know what's going on. Usually the guys who sell books and sell airtime on Gaia or whatever, they're the ones who say, this is the truth, and here you go, I'm telling you the truth. Meanwhile, if you ask for sort of any evidence, they won't be able to provide it, or they'll dodge the question. So I think that's one. I think the second thing is if they are obviously trying to sell you something in regards to constantly writing sort of books that are sort of not fact checked or not cited, and it's just their ideas, and again they're sort of selling it as truth. I think you sort of need to be cautious and critical. I think at the end of the day, we need to be just critically minded in general in regards to the people who speak at UFO conferences. I think that a lot of them are great, and I think that a lot of them are legitimate. Mark D'Antonio is a great example. I think he's an excellent researcher, and his books are terrific. But he doesn't walk around telling you this is what's happening and this is the truth and this is what's going on with the UFO phenomenon. 100%, I know. Send me your money. He doesn't do that. He, like the caller said, sort of presents his evidence and says, apart from this evidence, that's all I got. Whether you choose to accept it or not is up to you. But here's my data. I think that's the sign of a good researcher versus someone who says, for example, here is a list of the following songs and musical artists who had those songs downloaded into their heads by alien intelligences, then offers no evidence to support that, apart from the fact that some of the lyrics in the songs might, if you really stretched it, could be interpreted as, a UFO or abduction case. I'm speaking here particularly to Grant Cameron's most recent book, where he makes claims of a whole bunch of musical artists having songs downloaded from alien intelligences. Again, I find this a little dubious because at the end of the day, he can't back up any of his claims, but he's making a truth claim here. He's saying this is what happened.
I actually have people have gotten a hold of me that wanted to be on my show and talk about that, that are saying, that's their truth, the type of thing.
Yeah, and again, maybe they are, right? Like maybe the Beatles, did have their music downloaded into their brain by an alien intelligence. This could be the case. Yeah, this could really be the case. But again, we can't make a truth claim about that without any evidence to support that truth claim. We would need something that proves that to be the case. And I take issue when somebody says that is the case, but when asked for evidence does not provide it. How do you know the Beatles had these songs downloaded? Then simply showing me, the song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and, there's lights in it. This is clearly a UFO experience.
I
As
think
Freud
that
said,
was about LSD. That was about LSD. Yeah.
Of course, but at the end of the day, if we need to sell books and we need to pump out books quickly, if we don't need to cite or provide evidence, hell, I can write whatever I want.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So the line's open if anyone wants to give a call. So I like the way this is going, but Jordan Bonaparte that was on earlier said, "Boy, you really stepped into it." And
I sure did.
Yeah.
Jeez.
And no, it's okay. I think you're making a really good point here, and that is that if anyone out there says they have an answer, that's the one. That's a red flag. If someone's going to say they have the answer, because no one so far no one has the answer, and so if you hear that and you're listening to the show and you're interested in what someone has to say, I would not really listen to that.
I think if they approach it with an I don't know, but if they approach it by saying, I'm going to speculate here, or yes, I don't know, or this is just a theory or a hypothesis.
Yeah, you can listen to
great.
That. Sure.
Speculation's amazing. Like, it's like my favorite thing to do. I have a philosophy background, so like all I do is speculate. But I never say that this is 100% how the universe or the world or I function, because I don't know. Again, and you can't really blame the conferences necessarily, because I also understand as a conference organizer, I have to put, butts in seats. Alien Con just happened. Contact in the Desert is coming up, I believe. As well as all of the other UFO conferences. I mean, you need to sell tickets. And at the end of the day, if the Corey Goods and the David Wilcox and the Grant Camerons and not that I want to lump those in the same pile, but if the George Tsukaloses, if they're the ones who sell tickets, and you got to put food on the table, I get that that's part of that subculture as well. That is that conference culture of, we got to kind of, what are we doing here, right? Are we talking about ufology? Are we going to try and do and present legitimate research, or are we going to have a bit of a show?
Right.
And you need to walk a fine line there sometimes, maybe, especially if you want to have a successful conference that happens again.
Yeah, I'll talk to you about a conference after we talk to this caller. Caller, thanks for calling us, and tell us your first name and where you're calling from, please.
I'm Jim from British Columbia.
Hi, Jim.
Hey.
How are you? It's a Canadian show still.
Banias?
Yeah.
Hello, Banias.
Yes.
Yeah, you're a very smart guy. I'm a smart guy too, so I can tell how you're a very intelligent guy. But I have to know, have you had your own experiences, any paranormal experiences at all?
Yeah, whether I say fortunately or unfortunately, I have never had a paranormal experience that I can't sort of in my mind rationalize or explain away. I did have, I think, what could be described maybe as an experience with we could maybe say a ghost. However, I can sort of sit back and think about it, and I can, like I said, rationalize it a little bit that maybe I was mistaken. So it wasn't such an an experience that altered my life. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Yeah. So, I'm an objective observer. I used to train other people to be objective observers because I worked as an engineer. I've done science for a living and things like that. So I'm very objective. But sometimes, maybe I've had about 10 extreme paranormal experiences in my life. Once I saw 2 UFOs. I was with another person. She saw them first. She said they were UFOs. I looked at them and I could not figure out what they were, but under later investigation, what I saw fit the description that many, many other people supply, including, well, what I saw were the, what do you call them, the Foo Fighters of WW2, and I knew a guy who was a pilot of a plane in World War II, and he saw Foo Fighters too. Eh? So, okay, so I use the best methodology, and I know methodology. Actually, I lecture on methodology, and I use the best methodology, and I can explain these things away. And other things I've done, for example, I shapeshifted into a bear one day, and things like that. And I've been tested. I'm not on drugs. I've been tested. I'm sane, et cetera, right? So, okay. I find I talk to a lot of people about the paranormal, and I can really only get into it with a person who has had the paranormal experiences, really. And those people, I judge them one at a time, and sometimes they're mentally ill or they're on drugs or something like that. So I have to weed those ones out. But, a person like Martin has had his own paranormal experience. So I listen to him, and I know he's going to listen to me. Right, and this is philosophy, psychology, all mixed together, and it seems that a person has to have their own paranormal experience. And I'll tell you one more thing, Banias. There is a top physicist in the world today. He's one of the top 5 theoretical physicists, and he says, his own words are, quote, "Not all the universe is accessible by the scientific method, period." And I agree with him. I know what he's talking about. It's, we humans, we don't even understand time. We are very limited mentally, I think so. When you look at the universe, all of our science put together is not everything that there is. There's much beyond science, And so anyway, I should shut up now.
No, I really appreciate your call. I think you're right. I honestly do. In certain things, I agree with you that the scientific method is not enough to be, I guess, the ultimate arbiter of truth, and knowledge. I agree with you. I think that there is a lot of ways to access information, and science is one avenue, an important avenue, but it's one avenue among many. So I agree with you there. In regards to the having, sorry, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, well, you see, science is my main paradigm. It always has been. But then I started discovering the reality of the native peoples paradigm. These are the indigenous peoples of the world, the Bushmen of the Kalahari, the native people where I live here. I'm connected to them, and the Inuit and all these people. And I have experienced their paradigm as well. Their paradigm is totally valid, tested for thousands of years. It worked for them. It's a totally valid way of looking at the universe. And many of my paranormal experiences are explained by the paradigms of these, what I call the pre-writing people, or the people who only had oral tradition for their continuation of knowledge.
Yeah, it's funny. I do feature in the book that I'm writing. This ties back to what Mark and I were talking about sort of earlier in the show. But the problem is in regards to the UFO subculture is you have often other paranormal aspects that tie into the UFO phenomena, and then how do can you parse them out, or do you have to just include them? So in my area where I'm in Manitoba. The Wendigo legend among the local Ojibwe and Cree people here is huge, and I've investigated one or two Wendigo sightings. Not that you can really investigate those; you just sort of talk to the witnesses. But I do feature one in my book of a gentleman who I guess interacted he was driving in his car with this sort of creature that is based upon sort of Indigenous legend in the area. So yeah, I agree. I can't say his event didn't happen. I wasn't in the car with him, and ultimately, I believe his story because I think he's still sort of pretty shook up about it years after it occurred. So I don't think there's much disagreement between us. I think where I do disagree with you a little bit though is the fact that for me to maybe understand perhaps, but for me to sort of listen and be able to have discourse with sort of other people is that I have to have my own experience. I had this conversation with Ryan Sprague on his show, Somewhere in the Skies, and I sort of asked him, as someone who has had a UFO experience and myself, someone who has not, can we talk about the same things? Can we sort of exist on the same level, or does the UFO witness, or does the experiencer, or does sort of the person who's had experiences, are they sort of in a privileged position here? And he said, he doesn't think so. And again, we can maybe debate that idea. Is there sort of a privileged position in the UFO subculture, in the UFO community, for individuals who have had experiences?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, in the UFO sphere, I've only had one sighting of UFOs, but I can see that everybody speculates, right?
Mm-hmm.
Lynn Moulton Howe speculates in one direction, and then that other guy Dolan, he speculates off in a different direction, right? And you can see that their speculations come from their preconceived, their paradigms, their preconceived set of ideas about things. And then from that I see that, I have my own preconceived ideas too, right? So I think it's important for the individual to advance philosophically. I think it's important for the individual to know their own paradigm. And I was a science guy, totally trained and experienced in science and so on. But I discovered for myself, that's not all there is. So philosophically, I say we don't know. Mm-hmm. We just don't know. There's so much we don't know. That's how I handle it all philosophically.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. That's literally one of the opening lines in my book, or that is the opening line. It starts off with, I have to start from a position of I don't know, because we definitely don't.
We don't have a lot of time left. Thanks so much for the call, Jim.
Thank you.
So one of the things I just wanted to mention, we have just a few minutes left, is I was at a conference where this woman, there was a few people that claimed to be hybrid. So, I was kind of like skeptical right from the beginning. But then, this woman talked and she got very emotional and it was very convincing. But then, she showed, well, here's what I look like on their planet. And she actually held up a piece of paper with a crayon drawing of an alien. And it was like, wow, that's all you got. I want to tell you, that particular talk and the person that put the conference together said he was hesitant, but he had so much demand for that part, for those people to come on. But that got a standing ovation. And, I just couldn't buy it. Couldn't buy any part of it. And so is that, so that's part of your 50% right there, I think.
Well, yeah, again, I regret using a number. But this is sort of a common occurrence at the UFO conference, but also just within the subculture in general. And again, I have to be cautious. Maybe she is, right? Maybe that crayon drawing is a perfect depiction of her on their planet. And I don't want to sound glib. It's tough not to, but I don't want to sound glib. So I don't want, like, I ultimately don't want to be judgmental. And sometimes it's tough not to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the one thing I'll say is this, and this sort of was touched on in the previous call in regards to sort of talking about, is science the answer, or science is just one sort of paradigm and there's many. I think we obviously need to remain critical, and I think we also need to also understand that while we might have issues with science and the dogmatism of science, and we might have issue with science being sort of currently the leader or the main ideological framework by which we understand things, and there's potentially a whole bunch of others. The UFO subculture does not necessarily have access to some higher truth either. I think the UFO culture is made up of ideology and paradigm and its fair share of honesty and truth, but it's also a fair share of at times a bit of delusion and at times a bit of fraud. So the UFO subculture sort of functions like the rest of the world, right? There's people who commit fraud in regular everyday life. There's people who are delusional in regular everyday life, and there's people who tell the truth in regular everyday life. So I think we see a mirror of that in the UFO subculture. I think the one difference, though, is that the UFO subculture exists in this dualistic realm, as I talked about before, right? Individuals who function in the regular everyday, but also individuals who function in this total separate other universe, let's say, where the regular everyday reality is sort of meaningless to them, or has some meaning, but is really not important anymore because their lives have been altered drastically by an experience or just by engaging with the phenomenon in some way.
I do, yeah. I realize I was a little bit critical, but also I do want to say that I have no idea what, this woman obviously went through something very, that
Clearly.
really, really bothered her. Like I said, she became very emotional. And so, and she appeared to be talking from the heart. So I agree that, something happens. I shouldn't judge people either,
No, and it's tough not to, though, because sometimes they sound totally bonkers, right? I mean, that's also, the reality. At times, people say things and you just shake your head, and if you met this person in real life, you'd roll up the window of your car and, drive away as fast as you could, I think, sometimes.
Yeah. We only have a couple of minutes left, or just like a minute, I think. So listen, your book, do you have a website or is it Facebook? How does someone get a hold of you?
Right. Yeah. So unfortunately, my book isn't out yet. I'm finishing the last chapter. So if you're my publisher and you're listening to me, it's almost done, buddy. So I've got one more chapter to write. It's almost done, actually. And then it's going to get sent straight to my publisher, hopefully early this summer. And hopefully we'll have it out soon. So I will definitely keep you posted. And if you want to read any of my work, you can visit my website, my blog. It's at www.terraobscura.net.
Oh, that's right.
If you just Google Terra Obscura blog, it'll pop up. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Send me a message. I would be happy to talk to you. I'm always welcoming and I'm willing to listen to anyone's story. Because I got to be honest, that's, I think, what really ufology is. It's just collecting stories. And I'm also and I'm also on Mysterious Universe. So if you go to mysteriousuniverse.org, I contribute to them as well.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. That's that's quite a very active site. So do you have a working title for this book?
You know what? I do, but my publisher is, I can sense him right now. He's like in my,
he doesn't like it.
Yeah. Just no, he likes it. It's just he wouldn't want me to. He's like, you know what? Just don't talk about it.
I see. Yeah.
It's So
okay.
I do. Working title is the working title.
Okay. All right. Well, we still have a minute left. We don't have time to take calls, and there were some topics that I thought we could get into, but we weren't able to. One of them was I wanted to talk a little bit about MUFON because I know you did some writing about that. But it looks like we got about a minute left, so I think that's going to be it for the show tonight. And I want to thank everyone over there in KGRA Radio, and thank you very much, MJ. And let's stay in touch.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you very much for having me on. I know that there's some issues right now between our two countries, and
That's right.
I'll make sure there's no tariff on this conversation.
That's good. I love our neighbors to the north. So I hope we can work all that stuff out.
Oh yeah, we're up here. We love you guys. We love you guys. Don't worry, it's all good.
Yeah, we're crazy. We're crazy. All right, all right. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Martin.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, everyone. So we are coming back next week, and we should be in studio with Chris O'Brien, and it should be a lot of fun. And we will have Skype up to take calls on that as well. So you can send us some questions. I think we're probably going to do the show in a library or something on video with us sitting there. We'll try to figure something out here. Anyway, I want to thank people that helped out with the show. First of all, Jordan Bonaparte for helping us with the UFO updates. I want to thank Peggy for running the Facebook page. Also, Evan for doing the work in the background. And remember, you can like us on Facebook. Don't forget to do that. Check out podcastufo.com. I want to thank Race over at KGRA Radio. And that is going to be it. Chris O'Brien next week. And remember, everyone, to keep your eyes to the sky.